Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Danielle Trussoni.
Hello.
Danielle is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of 7 books. She has been the chair jurist of the Pulitzer Prize in fiction and wrote the monthly Dark Matters book column for the New York Times Book Review. Her fiction has been translated into over 30 languages. Her forthcoming novel, The Puzzle Master, has recently won and here's where I'm going to butcher this, the Selection Prix Bete Noir des Libraires in France, which is unfortunate that I have a French name and cannot speak French. And she currently lives in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico with her family. Welcome, Danielle.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here in this hotel room.
I know.
In Manhattan.
We're at Thriller Fest, so if you hear ambulances and all sorts of noise, that's because we're not in my basement in Montana, which is where we usually are, and it's quite quiet there. But we're so happy to be in real life and together and to talk about the Puzzle Master, which I fucking love. I swear, we swear on the podcast.
Okay, good.
But only in love and not in hate.
Right.
So please tell our listeners about the Puzzle Master.
So The Puzzle Master is a novel about an ingenious puzzle constructor named Mike Brink, who suffers from a traumatic brain injury that has left him with something called savant syndrome. And savant syndrome is a real medical disorder. Very, very, very few people have it. I think maybe 50 people in the world have this. What it does is it alters the brain so that the person who suffers from it develops a strange ability that they didn't have before. So, for example, someone who didn't know how to play the piano after they have this, when they have this brain injury and they develop savant syndrome, will suddenly be able to play like Bach or like classical music, like beautifully. And in this instance, Mike Brink develops a talent for puzzles, patterns, mathematics. He has an eidetic memory where he can remember like tens of thousands of pi, the digits,
yep.
Right? So he is just amazing that way. And he is called to an upstate women's prison by a psychiatrist who has a prisoner who's drawn a very complicated and mysterious puzzle, circular puzzle, and she wants Mike Brink to solve it. So that's the premise.
Okay, first of all, let's talk about the fact that the savant thing really exists, which I think is so fascinating. But let's also talk about Mike, because Mike is like a really normal guy before this.
Right.
He's a high school football player.
Right.
And he's gonna have a really normal life. And then he has this injury and he becomes, and in the beginning he suffers emotionally for this, like, not knowing what's wrong with him. And it's actually, there's a really lovely moment between he and his mother where he tells his mother this weird thing that's happening to him, thinking like, kind of feeling he's a little bit like considering ending his life because it's so hard for him. And I love that his mother, that made really warm my heart to his mother, who's not a big part of the book, but I did love her for that. But it's like, this is not the life he chose for himself. And then he ends up going to MIT. And of course he's, the MIT professors give him a hard time because he doesn't take notes.
Right.
And it's sort of like they kind of accuse him of cheating, even though of course he's not cheating, but he has this condition where he gets things, they come to him easily. And so all of his fellow graduates from MIT go and take these massive jobs with these consulting firms and build, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And and he's like, no, he goes and does this, that he becomes
a puzzle
he writes puzzles for the New York Times.
Right, which is probably not very lucrative. I don't know. I'm not a puzzle master.
But I'm guessing from knowing about the arts and being in publishing, it's right. It's not that probably lucrative, but it really is soothing for him.
Right. He has to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point of him taking this job, I guess, as a puzzle constructor, and why he is continually constructing puzzles is because he doesn't have a choice. It's the only thing that sort of soothes this condition. And there's a passage in the book where he describes it as being like, he doesn't know how it happens.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to explain how your heart pumps blood, or synapses, go off in your nervous system. Like, you don't know, your body is doing it without your permission.
Right.
And so for him, he'll look at a situation, say this room, and we'll see, this bed frame, and we'll see those square, the pictures, and he will see a completely different pattern. He'll see puzzles, he'll see dimensions, he'll see things completely differently than we will.
Right. And colors and numbers and
he
things.
has synesthesia.
Yeah. So so things appear with, explain that, because that's
so synesthesia is in the real condition in acquired savant syndrome. That doctors they have examined it, and their theory is that people develop synesthesia, which is a sort of combining of the senses. So for example, when you hear music, you taste something.
Yeah.
Or you, when you see colors, or you see certain letters, colors will appear.
Right.
Like Nabokov, for example, had synesthesia, and he would make lexicons of the colors and letter sort of combinations when he wrote.
Yeah.
Right. And so he has this. And what it does is it creates a texture in his mind, so that when he's sort of reciting pie places, or when he's memorized an entire encyclopedia, for example, it's the colors that are drawing him through and bringing him back to these experiences.
Right.
So anyway, all of that is to say that, he's doing this really out of necessity. It's the thing that saves him from going insane in some ways.
I sort of feel like that's what writing is.
Oh my God. I know. I feel like this is a metaphor for writing,
it totally
right? Putting things together, and you just have no choice, and you sort of have to do it, otherwise you're going to go nuts.
That's how I took a year off writing in the last however many years I've been writing, 20 years, and it was the worst year. It was like, I thought the writing was making me crazy. It turns out, no, I was already crazy. The writing was just keeping me barely on the scene. So tell us about Jess Price. So this is the woman who's in the book, and tell us, so she's a really interesting character as well. And
especially for killer women, right?
Yes,
so,
yes,
right.
exactly.
So
Here we are.
I feel like she's perfect for this. So Jess Price, it was a writer.
Yeah.
And she was very, lucky or talented or whatever. Her first book did very well, and she went to a Gilded Age mansion, upstate New York, and she was writing another book.
Right.
And a lot of stuff happened that's related to the puzzle that Mike Brink is solving, and she ends up murdering her boyfriend who came up to see her, and she's put in prison. She's so overwhelmed and terrified by what happened, because as we learned throughout the book, she didn't actually kill him,
right?
But she's so terrified,
which we all should know once we hear about the murder. Oh my God, I'm not going to give anything away because you have to read the book, but it is like, how anybody, we know there's forces at work there, but it is so she's fabulous, and she takes these jobs to be like a house sitter.
Right. She's house sitting all over Manhattan at first, and then upstate. And she does it so that she can write.
Yeah.
Because she's a writer in her 20s.
Yeah.
And we all remember, like, you just do whatever you can to write the next book.
Exactly.
And so she's doing that. But after this thing happens to her, after, her boyfriend is dead, she is silent. She doesn't know how to explain what happened. She can't even explain it to herself. And so there is some, initially she speaks to her first psychiatrist a little bit, and he begins to unravel what was happening with her, and then he's murdered.
Yeah.
And so she stops, and then there's another psychiatrist, and the only thing she does is she draws this puzzle, and she writes Mike Brink's name on the back of the puzzle. And so that's all they have. That's all her psychiatrist has. And she brings Mike Brink into it. And that's where sort of the point where everything begins.
Right. And what I love about Mike Brink is, of course, he's like, I'm, happy to help. Like, that's his thing. Like, he's got this gift. And I want to talk about unpack this a little bit, because I think it's an interesting thing. It applies to writing too, but it's like, how responsible is Mike to this situation, since he was named on the puzzle? He has this gift, which, he can use for good. I think obviously puzzles are a gift to whoever's doing them. People find them soothing or whatever. So there's nothing like what he does for his day job is also, of course, a gift in some ways, and an art for sure. But this is like, he has this ability to maybe help this woman who is in a really bad place, maybe is innocent of murder. And so he feels called to doing it. And then their first interaction is so intense that then he feels like he can't leave. And so I kind of want to talk about, like, what is what's his responsibility?
That's such a good question, because a lot of it is also that a side effect of his condition is that he has a hard time connecting with people, right? Like, I think we've all met someone like this, right? Who's so in their head and is so distracted maybe by their thoughts that it's just hard for them to have basic emotional moments. And he works very hard to have them, right? Because he realizes that this is a problem. But with Jess Price, he doesn't have to try. It's just this immediate
I get
chemistry.
shivers thinking
Like,
it was so good.
They just like, there's something. And so he feels compelled not only to solve the puzzle, and he does feel a responsibility in that direction, but his initial movement in is that connection with her and wanting to understand why this woman has that power over him. And then as we go through the book, he's drawn more, there are more and more consequences, and he's really drawn in to a point where he can't stop. So
it is, I mean, that I love that about it, because it's like, it's a so beautiful call to action for him, right? It's like, I just felt like, I mean, at first I thought, okay, you know, we see him do it as like, as a, you know, as a gesture of goodwill, like, yeah, sure, maybe I can solve this puzzle. I'm really good at puzzles. And then it's like, oh, you should, there's no going back on this. And then there's really no going back. And then it really alters his life. I mean, he's like, there's no escape from it. At some point, there's too many factors at play. He can't.
Too many factors at play. And by the end, he's drawn to the point where he has an experience. I'm not going to talk about it I don't want to give too much away, but he has an experience with Jess Price, and that's so inexplicable to him that it,
exactly what you mean.
In future books, because this is a series,
I love that,
he's going to be exploring what that means, that his brain acts in a certain way, not only just to solve puzzles the way that he thought, but there's another doorway that's open
for a man who's, you know, like you said, it's also so fitting that he struggles, and we see that obviously, I think, particularly people who are super smart, like they just like the emotion, and also people on the spectrum, of course, like this, and which I think sometimes are related, right? That incredible intelligence. And so he's like, the other thing that's so, and he's an endearing character. There's nothing really, I mean, he has to do hard things, but there's nothing like mean or edgy about him. I love that about him.
I love that too. Like, I wanted to make a hero who's really badass, but also that you just love, right?
I love him. I'm like, is he around in real life? Because I would like to meet him very much. And of course, Conundrum. He has a dog he calls Connie, whose name is Conundrum, and he's so sweet with her. He's very attentive. Like,
he's very attentive. She's kind of emotional support animal.
Exactly.
And he because he can't connect with other people as easily, and he really needs that. His dog becomes sort of his best friend.
I know, and it does, and I think that is so endearing. Like, it's really, anyway. And he has the relationship he has with a professor from, you know, an unusual professor who sort of helped him survive MIT, right? The professor who was like, "Why aren't you taking notes?" And then the professor was like, "Come up here to the board and tell us what you learned last lecture," and he can write the whole thing.
And it was like this very complicated theorem,
right?
And even if if a normal person like you and me, you and I had like taken notes, we wouldn't be able to even, you know, sort of transcribe them,
right? But
he just laid it all out there from memory.
And then the guy was like, "Okay, you no longer need to bring paper and pen to class.
No more notes necessary."
You but that was a lovely, I mean, I think it's a lovely thing to see the people who sort of watch out for Mike, because of what he's gone through, and then the way in which he watches out for other people. So let's talk about first of all, can you remember like the seed for the story? Did you discover the savant syndrome, or what?
So what started first was Jess Price, actually.
Okay, talk about that. That's so interesting.
Yeah, so I started writing that story first, and I thought in the beginning that was going to be the novel, just that story of her with this house and with the doll and the 19th century Prague section, like that was going to be it. And then I realized that it was just too claustrophobic, like it needed to be bigger. And so I, started writing the scenes of her in the prison, and I realized that's when Mike Brink came in, that there needed to be someone who could solve this puzzle. And then I reverse engineered everything and kind of rewrote the whole book around him.
I love it. Okay, so tell us about the process for that. Like, how long does it take you? Because these are like really intricate, big books. I mean, you're not like, dashing
it took 2
out.
years. Yeah, it took 2 years to write it, and multiple revisions and throwing a lot away. I had a whole different section in it at one point, and I'm hoping that the next book in the series won't take that long.
Well, you've established the world.
Right. I feel like I've got the world and the concepts and like the major themes, which is, consciousness and what our brain can do and what that means in the world. And plus, there's an element of AI in it, and there's an element of like, what longevity and immortality mean. Like there's all of these ideas that I'm interested in exploring. So hopefully the next books will come faster. But yes, this one was, very labor intensive and took a long time to write.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I mean, in addition to obviously the medical research about the neurology of this condition and what it can do, there's all these other aspects of this book that are really research intense. I mean, then the next obvious one is the puzzles.
Right.
So let's talk about that, because there's the explanation of the puzzles, the actual puzzles in the book.
Right.
Which, I saw one and I was like, I'm not going to.
Yeah, I hardly can solve this. So I am not a puzzle master. Let me just say.
You just play one on your book.
Like I just play one in my book.
Yes.
But I knew that I needed help. So I knew that I needed help. So I spoke with Will Shortz, who is the New York Times games editor and has this amazing show on NPR. And he brought me to his house and showed me his puzzle library. And I was like, oh my God.
Right.
Like it's so helped solidify that character for me.
Yeah.
And when I started talking to him about the puzzles in the book, I mean, he was too busy. He wasn't going to be able to help me, but he recommended 2 of his favorite puzzle constructors. So I worked with these guys. One did the math puzzles, and the other one helped me with the language puzzles. And he does crosswords. The word guy is like a very amazing crossword puzzle constructor. So together we worked on these, and what I would do is I would write, I had the plot points and I knew that I needed a puzzle there. And so I would, talk to Brendan. He's the word one. The number of puzzles were pretty easy. I said, I just need this and I needed to have the solution.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. And they came back to me in like 2 minutes because the guy is a genius.
That's
but the crossword puzzle, the word puzzles needed to spell something out that moved the plot along. And so we went back and forth many times where I was like, okay, we need it to say this so that we can, that this plot point can be satisfied and it's moving us here. And then he'd play with it and send it back. And then I would say, okay, no, I need this. And so we worked really intensely together.
It's cool that you had this access, but isn't it interesting that like when you find a need for something, like whether it's a police perspective or a medical perspective or anything, people are so like wonderfully gracious.
I'm so thrilled that they were. I mean, not everybody always is.
No.
Some people are like, I don't want to talk to you. I remember there was a time where I wanted to write something with the police, with the police in the small little town where I grew up, and they were not talking to me.
Interesting.
They were so not going to talk to me. But yes, the puzzle community is very tight. Like everybody knows each other. When I said, oh, Will Shortz recommended you, of course they opened up.
Right.
And so the next book is the main puzzle is a puzzle box, a Japanese puzzle box. And I just spoke to this amazing puzzle box constructor named Kagan Sound, who like walked me through the whole process of making a puzzle box and like what he was thinking. So cool. And it's very cool.
I love that you're already like I mean, that's how it works, right? We're already neck deep. We're already like, yes. Right. But I'm thinking
it through it. I just went to Japan to do the research.
I'm like, you're like, in my next book, I might have to go to like, Southeast Asia for some.
Well, exactly. I know. My husband's like, you're just choosing these locations so you can go like have a great vacation.
You're like, this is literally the one benefit, right? I mean, how many benefits do we get to being authors? There's not like
definitely not health insurance or life insurance or pension or
exactly none of those. But you get to go to Japan if you can.
But you can go to Japan to do research
if you have a good reason. Absolutely, right. I love it. That's really, really cool. Well, the other thing, I mean, and there are so many layers and the other thing I love it is about for a book that is so well researched and so intense in knowledge that I didn't have. You are giving us these people like Anne-Marie, who's she's a porcelain expert. And because the reason that they hired this woman to house sit this home is because the owner has passed away.
Right.
I'm not telling you this, you already know, but, and she has this incredible collection of porcelain dolls, and the house is going to be sold, and all those things need to be sort of inventoried before they can sell the home. And this woman comes, who's a, Sotheby's, what is she? She's basically
an expert in porcelain, and she's a professor, and she she, you know, basically does auctions.
Yes, exactly.
So she was doing an inventory of all of the amazing sort of collections that this woman, Aurora Sedge, had collected in her lifetime. She was something of a hermit and a hoarder, and had beautiful things.
Beautiful things. And the interesting thing about porcelain was what I had no idea, of course, and how, you know, not something I looked into before, was how like hard that process was early on. Nobody knew how to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so it took forever to figure out how, you know, how porcelain was made. And so it was very luxurious to own. And of course now it's very much more accessible, but I'm sure these incredible things, and those the dolls. And so we get also the perspective of the doll maker, who loses a beloved daughter and goes to Prague to work with a doll maker there who makes these incredible eyes. That's the Prague doll maker, and with these incredible eyes. Anyway, there's all of that stuff is so who taught you about porcelain, or did you do that?
I had to do all that research myself.
Yeah.
And there is actually a real woman named Anne Marie.
Oh, okay.
And she really is a Sotheby's, was a Sotheby's porcelain expert and is now a teacher, a professor. She was a friend of a friend, and we got together, and she like just gave me the rundown of like, this is this and this is this, and you can find information about dolls here and about the history of porcelain here. And it, you know, I really went into a rabbit hole with that one, with the porcelain, and with that whole thread of the book, like the 19th century Prague, the doll maker, the eyes. Like I had about 100 pages more of that stuff that I cut out.
Isn't that, I mean, so that is, and is that your normal, like, I mean, for you, it sounds like this book was I mean, as they all are, a labor of love, but you know, having to like written it and deconstructed it and taken all this extra stuff out, like I always
it's hard.
It's so hard. I feel like when I finish a book, there's like my out file is like 35%, 40% of my actual ending book is, and I'm always like, who's going to use those words? And some, you know, like you could pick them up and put them in another book.
know. You wish, like, if it was totally different, maybe I would, but basically what it was is that there was so much more of that 19th century Prague porcelain, Jess Price, the house section, because it was originally going to be its own novel.
Yes.
So a lot of that was shaved out. Then I kept maybe too much of the 19th century Prague section in until like the second pass, and then I'm just like, you know what, it's really lopsided. So I cut about 35 or 40 pages more out. And, you know, just because I want, you have to think about when you're writing a thriller, like all of, you know, like we do, we want the story, like the story itself is more important than these pieces.
Yes.
And the rhythm of the story was off because it was like dun 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 dun, dun moving really, you know, seamlessly. And then you get to Prague and it was like this long, slow section. And I was like, you know what, I love it, but it's breaking the rhythm, and it's ruining, it's marring the book, the overall book.
Yeah,
because I'm attached to this piece.
Isn't that, and like it takes a really like a level of experience, and
that you know that it's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay, but it's traumatic.
It's traumatic.
It's totally traumatic.
That part was really traumatic for me.
It's always traumatic, and you're like, I don't really want to let this go. These are beautiful, and I'm sure they are beautiful pages, but it didn't serve the story. And you're right. And I think that is a real and that is particularly true of writing genre fiction. Is we do have to sort of like abide by the pacing and plot, and those aspects are really important. And so you do, and I think in the end it's worth it because the book does a beautiful job of balancing, you know, these beautiful, I mean, obviously beautiful prose, which of course you're known for, and this really complicated but huge payoff plot with these fabulous characters. And I didn't know until you sat down that this was going to be a series. So that is a wonderful, wonderful thing to hear. Is this your first series, or you've done this before?
Angelology, which was my first novel. I'm just going to tell you this here. No, I normally don't say this, but it wasn't supposed to be a series, but I was offered contracts from my foreign publishers to do a second book. So I did a second book. Yeah. And then my American publisher, the last one, bought it and published the second book. It wasn't going to really be a long series. Right. So there's two. Right. And maybe I'll go back and do a third one someday.
And that second one is called
Angelopolis.
Okay.
And so it wasn't conceived as a series. This one was conceived of as a series.
Okay.
I sold 2 books, to my publisher with the intention, as soon as I turned this one in, I started the next one.
Okay.
We're publishing next year.
So that is super fast.
Yeah, for me, it's fast. Publishing.
But that's another thing thriller readers love, right?
Well,
we're
and
like,
that's
we
something
can't,
right.
I know, we're like, we don't want to wait. Like, I'm already like, when's the next book coming? And you're like,
Right.
oh my God, I just want to.
And I don't want to spend 2 or 3 years writing the
Right.
next book. So
Right.
it will be less complex, right? It
Yeah.
won't have the intricacy. It won't take me 2.5 years to write, hopefully.
But some of the intricacies are already built in.
Right, it's
Like, so-
here.
yeah,
So
so
it's
you
just
don't have to-
unraveling sort of those
Right.
conceptual knots.
You don't have to feel like it won't take as long to write. You'll feel like it's less intricate, but mostly because probably you're doing less work.
Right.
I bet you're underestimating how,
Yeah, there's no historical sections, for example.
Yeah,
Right. I mean,
right.
there is history in it. Like all of my books have history. And, the sort of element that I think I brought up before, where Mike Brink has this sort of revelation about what his brain can do.
Yeah.
Like that's tied to the whole series, like
Mhm.
what he actually is.
So I know. I love him. I'm not kidding. Like, I'm like, who's gonna play him in the movie? 'Cause I'm
I
just
love
super
him
curious.
too.
I
Actually,
know.
he's the reason there's a series, because I just fell in love with the character.
I
If it had been
know.
just Jess Price, who I also like, but she's not as I don't know, there's just not, I don't have the same sense of like I want to keep exploring her.
Yeah.
But I think it's because of the brain injury. And I think something that you hit on earlier is really interesting to me, that he was just a normal person.
Yeah.
And all of us in some ways, I think, experience something like that, whether it's a trauma that happens to us, like we were one way and then something happens and we're forever changed.
Right.
And learning how to live with it and how to be thankful for like all that we have in this
Yeah.
world. Like it's really an interesting point of, I don't know, a nexus for me. And I also don't think that that is highlighted so often in thrillers.
Mm-mm.
So that's something that I think that there's room for.
Yeah. And I mean, and the other things that you're talking about, like consciousness, like and mortality is a huge part of this book. And that in this, of course, that's as old as time too, right? The quest to live longer and or forever. So there's also some supernatural elements, which I
Mhm.
really enjoyed. I mean, I think it pushes us, because in some ways his condition's unbelievable.
Mm.
I mean, it's a real thing, but you know
Right.
what I mean? There's so many moments you're like, really?
Yeah.
Like, people do this? This is insane. But it's, so then the sort of like you sort of stretch us that way, and then stretching us to this other sort of new kind of unbelievable thing feels like such a stretch. It's like it's like the way we acclimate to anything, like heat or cold, right? We're
Right.
like, oh, it was cold, but now I'm a little warm. And it's like, whoa. And I love that you're challenging the reader to be like, where does the line exist, right?
Right. Also, I think in the world of my books in particular, I like to push it as far as it's going to go.
Mhm.
And for some people, it's too far, right? Some people love it. Some people are like, whoa, that's too crazy for me. And
Yeah.
some people are like, oh my God, that's exactly the level of, the vibe that I'm looking for in a thriller or in a book
Right.
like this. Is I want to go places I don't normally go, and
Right.
and I want to feel things I don't normally
I
feel.
love that. And I love the fact that, like, I'm not necessarily like a fantasy reader, and this isn't a fantasy at all, but I don't necessarily always, but once in a while somebody puts a book in your hands and it's like not what you thought you were expecting, and it just is like, but it's, if you don't read sort of outside a box, I feel like then that's when you get those experiences that are
Right.
so moving. And this is when you fall in love with characters who you're like, if you find Mike Brink, can you just like send him my way?
I'm going to. Actually, he's going to go my way first, because
Fair.
I've been imagining him for a long time. But I will then
I appreciate it. I love.
you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, good. I'll take a hand-me-down, Mike Brink.
okay.
I'm not too proud. I love it. Well, can you tell us like a little bit more about the second book, or
Sure. Yeah, totally. So it's called The Puzzle Box.
Okay.
And Mike is basically there's this very famous contest in Japan to open a puzzle box that was made in the 19th century by the Japanese Emperor Meiji. Okay. He had this elaborate.
So it's a real thing.
No, I'm making it
okay.
up.
Okay, fair.
But I'm using history, so like I'm gonna set it up like it's real.
Yeah.
But the thing is that with all my books, I want people Googling.
Yeah.
Right. Like when people read my books, whether it's Angelology or this one or The Ancestor,
Yeah.
I would like them to like be looking online like, is that true?
Yes.
Or, so the
You
pros
do a great job of that,
feel
yeah.
like it's real, and then unbelievable things happen and people have to buy, either they buy it or they don't. But so yeah, the box in my book is made in the 19th century by an emperor who has hidden something extremely important inside to his dynasty and from his ancestors. And he makes it at this time in Japan when, people don't know a whole lot about Japanese history, but in 1868, the samurai were banned. The shogun gave basically handed over power back to the emperor. The emperor was not in power, and the emperor since that point on to even now, or actually till, this is getting a little convoluted, but until 1944 in the Second World War, ruled Japan. So when this item was put in this box, it was of a great historical significance. And then the emperor never opened it. The person who made the box died, and no one can open it. So every 12 years, the imperial family invites the most famous puzzle constructor to Japan to try to open it.
Right.
And he comes, and then all hell breaks loose when he gets it open.
Oh, I love it. So Mike opens it. Of course he does.
Of course he does.
Love it. I love it. Oh my God. That's okay. When do you expect that in 2020?
September 2024.
Oh my God. It's so fun.
It's good.
Well, I have to say, I brought it because I finished it on the plane because I was like, started it too late, but I finished on the plane. I'm just like, I was in just another world. I was like, I could have stayed on my plane, and just, that's another thing I love about this book. And I know it's true of all of your books because I've heard that. And this is my first Danielle Trussoni, but certainly not my last, is that it's a book you'll think about. Like there's a lot of like moral dilemma stuff that, that really is, it's a it's a thriller, it's fiction, but there's a lot of real stuff.
Yeah, I mean, especially as we're moving with technology into the future,
AI,
with artificial intelligence and blockchain and all of the stuff that's happening in our world that feels very overwhelming and difficult to understand. There's an element of that in this book. It's not an overwhelming element, it's a small thread, but it's enough that it's going to be explored more greatly in the next book.
Yeah.
And it's something,
which is so timely.
It's just something that I'm thinking about too.
Yeah.
Like, what in the world are we going to do with AI?
I know. And probably they're not going to write our books though. That's the good news.
Well, I hope not.
Not this kind of book. No way.
Okay.
Not till we're retired. Then they can take over.
Screw everybody else.
Then they can take
the next generation.
Exactly. Well, God, we've screwed them in so many other ways, right?
We're going to leave them a dead planet, no art.
Yeah, and force them to have babies. It's also lovely. I love this book. Also, this is the first time I've had another Danielle on and we were just joking beforehand that I speak Italian. So Danielle Trussoni, obviously beautiful Italian
name.
And then I'm Danielle Girard,
and I speak French.
so we're
kind of like all mixed up.
We are.
We're
Totally
braided.
twisted.
Twisted Danielle.
I know. Maybe we can switch names sometimes when we travel.
That would be really funny.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Wouldn't
it be funny if we looked the same too?
I know.
Then we could do, but you have blue eyes, I have brown eyes. So I don't know.
Do some contacts.
We could get contacts.
I feel like we could make it work.
We could totally switch identities.
There you go.
I'm going to do this podcast one day.
This could be, I'd love it. That'd be fabulous. Well, I absolutely, and we could, we have to travel together and then you could be, you could be our French speaker and I could be our Italian speaker.
Oh my God, we'd have half of Europe covered.
I mean, I know the Italian contribution is very minimal.
I don't know. When I go to Italy, I really wish I could speak Italian because people don't speak English as much there.
That's true. It is a wonderful. And
I love Italy so much.
Me too.
And I just never learned.
And then what took you to Mexico?
So I live in San Miguel de Allende, which is right in the center, and it's up in the mountains. And there's this amazing little artistic city. They have a writers conference called the San Miguel de Allende Writers Conference, and it's one of the largest international book conferences in the world.
And when is it?
It's every February.
Oh my God,
So you guys should come.
I'm gonna come.
And if you want to teach a workshop, you should let me know, because there's workshops that people teach and people come. It's like thousands of people come every year.
God, it sounds so fun. I'm in. See, I just got, look at that. I got an invite. I was like, that was what I was looking for.
I know.
Way.
Okay, I know. Now I got it.
And you could come to Montana, but you definitely don't want to come in February.
Probably not in
It's the
February.
best
That's when
time.
you want to come
Exactly.
to Mexico,
You
because
come-
it's 70 degrees every day.
Oh my God.
Right now is the hottest time of the year, and it's about 80.
Yeah, it still doesn't sound too uncomfortable. But
It's
if
pretty
you-
great.
Yeah, it sounds.
And it's up in
pretty.
the mountains, so it's like, it's, you know, cool, and I don't know.
Nights are cool.
Nights
and-
are cool, and the weather is just really perfect.
But what sort of? So was it the conference? You went to the conference, or
So
how
that
did-
was part of it. It was during the pandemic, and I lived
Yeah.
in New York and really wanted to leave.
Yeah.
And I did know about the conference, and we went down, and we just found a house like instantly that we wanted to rent, and we met a lot of really cool people, and we were like, let's just do it.
Good for you.
And it was
guys.
at that moment when, you know, property could sell very easily. We put our house on the market. It
Yeah.
sold like with 5 offers in like a week or something.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, it's meant to be. Here we go. And we've been there for 2 years.
And you love it.
We love it. Yeah, I love it.
It sounds heavenly.
It's very nice.
We're gonna have
It's-
to talk more about that.
yeah,
because-
you should come down. I think you would really, really like it.
I would. Yeah, it sounds amazing. Well, it sounds like you have like kind of like a really awesome existence right now. I'm really happy for you. I know as a
thank you.
writer, this is not the way it always goes.
It hasn't always been that way for
I
me.
know.
I have
know.
to say there have been times when I've been living it. Well, I won't get into it, but you know the things that you do. You like live in terrible places, and
Yeah.
you know you're basically scrimping so that you can write the next book and
I
just keep
know.
it going.
I know.
So
But you know what? I mean, this is like, it's the art. I mean,
right,
and it's so important to have it in the world because it makes us think, and it brings us joy. And these are hard times. So you do, I mean, it's not like 100% happy book, but there's so much good in there that is like, I find I get it weirdly, and maybe this is my own twisted brain, but I find thrillers to be really, there's a lot of hope in them.
oh totally. And also who was it that I think I don't know why I'm thinking of Nabokov today. This Russian writer, his entire family lost everything in the Russian Revolution, right?
Yeah.
He lost a brother in a concentration camp. Like his father was assassinated.
Mhm.
And he never wrote about politics. And I'm not saying that people who write about politics, that's the wrong thing to do, but he wrote because taking his mind outside
Right.
of that and
Right.
offering beauty and
Right.
escape and an intellectual space where people can just live
It's so
outside
powerful.
of the world. It's so important and powerful, and it
Yeah.
really refreshes us. And I think you're right. I think it's important to for people to read thrillers or anything that makes you feel that way.
Right. I agree. And that's right. And I totally appreciate the way that you also combine sort of like a very literary thriller. It's just a very rewarding experience. So I'm so happy that you wrote this and that you shared it with me. And it's so fabulous. And I'm so excited Mike Brink is back. I'm
Me
not kidding
too.
when I say
I don't have to say goodbye to him.
he's my new celebrity crush. He doesn't exist.
Oh my God.
It's sad when your celebrity crushes are like created, they're not even like real people, but it's good. It's good. He's fabulous.
That's a writer's way of thinking,
That-
right?
I
Like,
know. Totally.
He's real for you.
And to this podcast is airing today is June 13th, if you're listening to this, and that is the day the Puzzle Master is out in the world. So go
On
grab your
sale.
copy. It's so exciting. So congratulations.
Thank you. And thanks, Danielle, for having me on this. This has been really, really
Oh my
fun.
God, so fabulous. Thank you everyone for joining us on Killer Women. This is Danielle Trussoni, and we will see you next time. Bye.